Hi there, everyone. I'm Clark Cahill, Events Manager with the South China Morning Post. Thank you all for being here with us for the latest installment of our SCMP Conversations webinars, this one about the new norm of innovation and sustainability. Our panelists today are Natalie Chan, who's Managing Director of PIE Strategy Limited, Donald Lowe, who's the Director of the Institute for Emerging Market Studies at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Tommaso Di Giovanni, who's the Vice President of International Communications at Philip Morris International, and Michael McComb, who's the Vice President of Communications and Sustainability at SAP Greater China. Moderating the discussion will be Winnie Chung, who's the Editorial Director at the SCMP. Before we begin, I just want to make sure our audience members are aware that we encourage you to submit questions to our panelists throughout the course of the discussion. You can do so by using the Q&A function in the WebEx platform. We'll be reserving some time at the end of the session for your questions, so submit your question at any point during the webinar, and we will do our best to get it over to our panelists in the amount of time that we have. Without further ado, I will pass things over to Winnie to dive into the conversation. Winnie, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, Michael, Natalie, Tommaso, and Donald. Thank you for joining me on this panel today. I'm sure we're going to have quite a good discussion in the next hour.
Thanks, Winnie.
I think it would be safe to say that this year has forced the world to reevaluate sustainability strategies with a need towards greater innovation. Many of us tend to think of sustainability in green measures, in terms of green measures, but I think events of the past year have kind of pushed for greater urgency in innovations for social good. So on that note, maybe I should start with you, Tommaso. Maybe you could tell us what sustainable innovation means for Philip Morris, given that I think it requires you to move away from your core business. How challenging has it been?
Hi everyone. Good morning from here, good afternoon for you. Look, let me take a step back. Sustainability is very often explained as really encompassing three pillars, right? I mean, we always talk about economic, environmental, and social. And some call them profits, planet, and people, the three Ps, the famous three Ps. Now, for us as a company in our industry, which is mostly tobacco and nicotine, means different things. It goes from taking care of the farmers, because ultimately we do sell a plant, protecting our employees and reducing carbon emissions, and many other things. But while these are all equal important elements of sustainability, and we take them very seriously, it is equally clear to all of us that the biggest positive impact, the biggest contribution we can give to society is to address the core issue that our products have, which is they cause disease. Cigarettes cause diseases. And this is the objective that sits at the top of all our sustainability priorities. And 20 years ago, we didn't really have much to do in this field. We know that combustion is what generates the vast majority of toxic compounds found in cigarettes, but we didn't have the technology, the science, the innovation that's needed to address that issue. But today we can. Today we have this technology, this science, this innovation. So innovation and science actually sit at the core of our sustainability. And we're moving towards a world we hope, or we do our best to get there, where cigarettes are replaced with products that do not combust and are based on science. We can't get there alone. Others need to play their part, but we're definitely moving in that direction. So that sits at the core of our sustainability.
Right. Okay. Maybe I could go to you, Michael. I mean, like SAP, you provide software solutions for a wide range of industries. How has sustainable innovation in recent times shaped your business development?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that we need sustainable innovation now more than ever, right? The situation that we're in on a number of fronts it clearly demands it. Obviously, we need healthcare solutions most urgently, but I don't think any of us can forget that beyond COVID-19, we've got the biggest challenge facing mankind, which is climate change, right? So we're going to have to look at how we're focusing on and prioritizing innovation in areas like energy production, climate change abatement and mitigation, as well as things like, properly developing smart cities, mobilities, cooling, architecture. These are the kinds of things that we're going to have to focus on. And as Thomas said, we're going to have to look at how we're, as society, focusing on prioritizing science and trusting in these things to help create and drive the value that we're going to need. So at SAP, a lot of the conversations we're having with our enterprise software customers is, how can we help look at their ROI on innovation in these areas? Because a lot of times, the business case for sustainable investments doesn't always come back positive because they're using perhaps the wrong ROI assessment model, right? Whether it's a time frame or the measurement of benefits returned and so forth, and they're not taking necessarily a full account of the benefits that some of these investments might provide to societies, and you can look at true cost models and so forth. So I think these are some of the things, and I think corporates, the role of business, we can certainly support a lot of increase in prioritization in investments like in venture investments, social impact investing, and things like that. Intrapreneurship within companies, where we incentivize and encourage employees to go beyond their sort of set roles and think about what contributions they can make.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, are there sort of practical examples that you could sort of share?
Yeah, I mean, so we have on the social investing side, we've got a couple of things. We've got an IO program, which we look at acquisitions or investment opportunities for outside companies. And a lot of the evaluation and assessment of these acquisitions is, will they be providing some sort of a social or environmental benefit? Right. And so it's not, I mean, I think in the past we used to say, how can we acquire technology that would fit into our software portfolio and just accelerate the benefits for our customers? And I think that's now evolving to providing a broader scope of expected benefits. And I think one of our flagship program from an intrapreneurship perspective, and this is a global program, it's called 1 Billion Lives. Right. It's a very ambitious program, and it was established by a global board member. And the idea is, how can we, as a single company, assess and create programs and ultimately impact 1 billion people positively? These are just, I think, two examples of companies which have set up very specific programs that have executive commitment behind them, and of course we have regional and local programs that support and mirror these. But at a global level, I think it provides that kind of lighthouse for the rest of the company and the culture.
Okay, thank you. Natalie, I know you work with a lot of different clients, advising them on building and reporting on their strategies. Have you seen any changing trends there? What are the changing trends that you've actually seen in the past year or so?
I would say, I've been in the field of sustainability in Hong Kong, Asia for over 15 years now. And hands on my heart, I actually feel quite encouraged to see the trend in the past couple of years, in the sense that in terms of sustainable innovation, instead of companies still looking at how to drive profit, and then afterwards, contributing to social good, and at the same time trying to minimize their negative impact on the environment, we are seeing companies now seeking how they can actually integrate, creating positive impact to the environment and the society, in their core business model, basically with their business activities to create share value that will benefit the company as well as driving positive change. For example, at PI, we help program manage and design an award scheme for a foundation in Hong Kong, which is called the Business for Social Good Outstanding Award, looking at local examples of companies that can truly have a business model that marry profit making with impact making. So I will just give you an example of one of the winners from last year's BSG Outstanding Award, which has won the Excellence in Innovation, is GapForce. For those of you that are based in Hong Kong that are joining this panel, you probably would, when you hear the name GapForce, you will remember all the guys in uniform with their guns and then like guarding the ATM machine. So they are in the cash like processing and transit business. But with the rising trend of electronic payment, so the management team are foreseeing that they would need to look for a way to diversify their core business model over the coming decade. So what they try to draw on is their expertise in electronic security system, and also looking into the growing trend of aging population in many of the cities in Asia, including Hong Kong and across China and Asia Pacific areas. So they actually adapt and apply their electronic security systems expertise into elderly homes in Hong Kong in the last couple of years, and then design an anti-wandering system to prevent some of the elderly, especially those suffering from dementia, from accidentally run off when the elderly home caretakers may be busy with other things. So that helps nicely to help protect, safeguard the safety of the elderly, but at the same time opening up new market, new business opportunities for GapForce. I thought this kind of innovation is really, really amazing and encouraging.
So, I mean, it's not just Philip Morris that's just, moving away from their core business. So we see GapForce as well. On a macro level, Donald, you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah. On a macro level, maybe, can you tell us what role you can see with governments playing in this and how they can work with businesses?
Yeah, I think what's been interesting, Winnie, in this pandemic is how forcefully governments around the world, especially the developed world, have intervened in mitigating the effects of the economic crisis,
Right.
Particularly in the form of providing emergency relief to workers, providing emergency credit to small businesses. This is a real contrast to the global financial crisis more than a decade ago. The governments were, a lot more hesitant. I think this time around, the response from governments, especially in the developed world, has been far more aggressive in trying to save jobs and protect livelihoods. I think another interesting aspect of this pandemic has been the contrast between America and the US. As you know, America tends to favor flexible, efficient labor markets, government intervening less, whereas European labor markets tend to be viewed as more rigid, more inflexible, more social protections, and therefore less efficient. Right. What is interesting, I think, as from a policymaker's perspective and from an economist's perspective, is that European labor markets, which are less efficient in normal times, have actually fared much better in this crisis. Unemployment rates are much lower in Europe than in the US. Employment has held up much better in Europe than in the US. So I think what this comparison shows is that there is an inherent trade-off between, on the one hand, economic efficiency, which we have tended, government, societies, businesses have tended to valorize, to prioritize in the last 30, 40 years. Trade-off between that and with economic resilience and social resilience. And I think that what sustainability and the sustainability conversation that we've been trying to foster in the last decade or so has been indeed to try to find a better balance between economic efficiency and considerations of economic resilience, social resilience, and also economic inequality.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Michael mentioned ROIs just now, and then you're mentioning, efficiency versus, resilience. Obviously, maybe it's a simplistic way of looking at it, and correct me if I'm wrong. It seems that efficiency is a more short-term solution to everything, whereas the resilience is the longer-term thing. What are your suggestions, let's say, for companies, especially those struggling with the current financial woes and all that, in making this decision to balance it?
Yeah, I think it's more than just between short-term and long-term. Efficiency tends to be quite a narrow measure of not just returns on ROI, but also a narrow measure of financial or fiscal viability or fiscal sustainability in government's context. And I think what this pandemic, as well as longer-term climate change challenges that both Tommaso and Michael talked about, has revealed is that what might make sense from a short-term efficiency perspective may not make sense from a longer-term resilience or sustainability perspective. So, for instance, take for example the very extended supply chains that we've built up in the last 20, 30 years thanks to globalization. They've become very efficient, right? But at the same time, because they're so extended, they're also extremely fragile. And this pandemic has revealed that a small shock can create widespread disturbances and disruption. Another example is in our hospital system, our healthcare system. Over the last 30 years, in the name of cost cutting, in the name of efficiency, we have tried to maximize hospital occupancy rates. So on a normal day, 80 to 90% occupancy rate in a hospital seems very efficient. But the moment a pandemic strikes, you realize that your system, our healthcare systems, aren't that resilient. They're quite fragile. Mm-hmm. And I like the point that Natalie made about diversification, because ultimately diversity is what enables our systems to be more resilient. I'll give the example of the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, which is a kind of a non-profit that is funded by corporations, by governments, by think tanks and foundations. It was established in 2016. And for the last few years, it has been trying to identify vaccines against emerging infectious diseases. Right. Obviously, we wish it had been around longer because, with COVID-19, we might have identified. Now, many of the vaccines that this coalition establishes would not see the light of day because those emerging infectious diseases may never materialize. So it's not efficient in our traditional sense, but it enhances global society's resilience against future epidemics.
Yeah, because sustainability culture is something that, implies that it needs to be embedded at all levels of an organization, including, values and underlying assumptions. Michael, employees obviously take their lead from companies they work for to build this sustainable culture. And it's easier said than done. So, what do you see as the role of senior leadership in companies for this?
It is easier said than done. Culture is one of the hardest things to foster and cultivate, especially in large corporations, because they're really just microcosms of society in general, right? And we've seen laid bare the fractions of society recently. And I think when it comes to the topic of sustainability and a sustainability-oriented culture, you see people's interests, their passions, their demands come out in their workplace with their companies. And we've seen a lot of employee activism, notably, you remember at Amazon recently, and that remarkably changed track, and we saw some significant announcements, investments out of some employee action. Google's the same, and tech companies, they're fairly high profile, and we're the same. We have a lot of very, very passionate employees, 100,000 around the world, and our leaders, I can say hand on heart, they do care, and this is the thing. And I think so. To answer your question, what can they do? Fostering and cultivating a culture of sustainability. Culture is like a patchwork quilt, right? There's no one magic pill. There's no one thing you can do. It's making sure that you're stitching different parts and different actions, different behaviors, communications together as best you can to kind of cultivate that in a way that makes sense and moves the interest forward, and communicating that commitment. I think in terms of our board and our leadership, we've had a kind of a resurgence of interest in and commitment to sustainability, I think, over the last year, which has been great to see. On the one hand, you could say the individuals have young children, and maybe that's a key when you can tangibly, palpably in your own family, in your own world, see the next generation and have their interest at heart. That's the first step. But the important point is to make sustainability part of your business and part of your culture, and part of your core business. Otherwise, it does sometimes not connect with sort of the rank and file employee, right? And it has to do that. And by bringing it down into your core business and connecting sustainability interests with what you do as a business is the thing that the leader can do the best. And obviously, they need to do the required things like listening to employees. 94% of our company says that sustainable action and behavior is very important. So, when we survey our employees, it's at the top of the list. So we have to listen to that and act on it. We have to make sure that employees have an opportunity to get engaged, right, and get involved. And so we have sustainability ambassadors in all of our offices. We have partnerships around the world that have opportunities to get involved with, like the World Economic Forum. We partner with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, with Accenture and other partners on sustainability programs globally and regionally. And I think, obviously, like I said about the core business, to have a strategy that you can clearly articulate is something that a leader can effectively do. Our product portfolio is starting to really incorporate a very, very clear sustainability strategy. First of all, we call it Climate 21, and it's embedded into our core software products, so to help our customers with their own sustainability activities.
Right.
And like I said before, just prioritizing science. As a technology company, that's not really a problem for us, but I think for companies in other industries and for leaders in other industries, just making sure that you're prioritizing STEM and helping young people in the companies prioritize that and develop those skills.
Right. I mean, for Tommaso, in moving from, cigarettes to smoke-free products, what has been the basic sort of challenges that you've had to encounter? Have there been any sort of learnings that you have taken away from there?
Look, yes, and a lot of learnings. I think that, as I mentioned before, we've been working at this change for almost 20 years now. But it's only in 2016, after a successful trial with our first smoke-free products, HKUST in Japan and Italy, that our CEO went public and actually embedded this change in the purpose of the company. He stated publicly that we want, as soon as possible, cigarettes to be replaced by better alternatives based on science. And that is now actually in our proxy statement. It's a committed signed by the board of directors. What this entails, though, it's a huge change in the company, because we're moving from a product that is relatively simple, in fact, cigarettes.
Yeah.
A product that's been sold almost in the same shape and form for 150 years. To something that is now based on technology, because it involves often electronics. It's deeply rooted in science, and that requires a big change in the company, a big transformation that, to my knowledge, no company has ever done proactively and voluntarily. It's a disruption from the inside out that we hope is going to actually impact other companies and societies. This, of course, entails a big cultural change. Because we're moving from a company that is very stable and consistent to a company that needs to be agile. The company needs to be consumer-centered, centered in dialogue, because this change will not happen only because of us. We need others to play a role, and it's science-based. But to give you some numbers, I think we're getting there. Look, since 2008, we've invested over $7 billion for this change. We have today over 400 scientists, experts, and staff that work with us. This was something that we never could think of in the previous world of tobacco. We are now with R&D partners in 30 locations worldwide, including Hong Kong, where we actually just established an e-hub, a hub that helps us between the manufacturing, which is mostly in China, and the product design, which is mostly in Switzerland. We're at the point where almost 100% of our R&D is dedicated to those products, to give you an idea. And we're getting there. Now, today, 11 million smokers are already using our smoke-free product, and they've abandoned cigarettes. The product is present in 57 countries, which in 3 years. It's almost unexpected progress. And the US FDA on July 7th actually authorized, and this is a big milestone, the commercialization of the product as a modified risk tobacco products with reduced exposure claims in the US. It's the first time it happens in the country. We went through intense scrutiny of our science, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pages of science. But again, the biggest change we're facing is the need for dialogue. We traditionally have been known as a relatively close company that speaks very little. And now instead, we're in a world where we need to convince people of the value of what we're doing for society. After decades of intense, I wouldn't even say fights between us and those who oppose us. Now it's time for dialogue and instead embracing science for the good of everyone. So I think this cultural transformation, which is the transformation of the roots of the company, really is just at the beginning.
Right. Okay. Natalie, you mentioned just now, I mean, like, you know, a lot of companies are actually sort of integrating all these initiatives into their normal businesses already. But, you know, I'm quite sure that there still are businesses that are having difficulties or challenges with initiatives like this from the top down. You know, what challenges have you seen with these businesses that you've dealt with?
I think if we try to talk about challenges, like we have to extend the panel, right? There are tons of different challenges from cost, from people, from your peers, from your subordinate, from convincing your top management, all of these. But I think the key for, like Michael has already given us like quite a flavor of a range of key issues that one has to watch out in building a sustainable culture, sustainability culture that can foster innovation and foster like longer term prosperity. And I also want to share another observation, I would say, another observation that we have seen from working at PI when we work with a lot of the family-owned business in Asia. So when we work with some of these owner CEOs who are the majority shareholders of their business and who are also the CEO that are running the operation. So one thing I think the insights we have seen is that perspective of time. It's the perspective of time, like what Donald mentioned about if you are focusing on short-term efficiency, sometimes you knowingly or unknowingly you will be sacrificing long-term effectiveness as a business. So what we have interestingly seen with these owner CEOs is, I would say, they are almost, their mentality, a number of the younger generation whom we work with, is they are having a mentality of playing an infinite game. So they are not in their position running the businesses for a 4-year term, 3-year term, and trying to prove their performance within 1 or 2 years, or 1 or 2 quarters. So what they are seeing is they are able to see far ahead, looking at, okay, if I'm here to stay, if I'm here to run a sustainable business, if I'm here to join long-term sustainable prosperity, how should I play my game? So when we found that, and we actually conducted also a research like with these owner CEOs, trying to understand their mentality, what drives them in like playing this infinite game. So what we can see is that when they can have this perspective of like running their business for a longer term game, actually like their personal interest as a shareholder of the business nicely align with the common good, with environmental sustainability with social sustainability. And in their business decision making, knowingly or unknowingly, they are actually taking into consideration other stakeholders' view, like their employees, their vendors, the other partners, rather than purely looking at this time, I'm going to win all and trying to squeeze everything out of the other parties. So I think when we want to foster a sustainable culture, there are many, many different hurdles. One of the key hurdle that I feel after all these years is the ability, is the capability of the top management to see the horizon of time as they are playing an infinite game.
Right. Thank you. I mean, obviously, the past 6, 7, 8 months with COVID has kind of obviously affected everyone. In fact, maybe derailed some plans and all that. Michael, what do you see are the shifts in priorities across the different industries with your clients?
Well, for us, I mean, SAP is an enterprise software company. So one of the most obvious and evident areas where we saw the impact of COVID was in supply chains. As Donald said, since we help operate global supply chains with our software, we were right on the front lines with that. And yes, as Donald said, these take years, decades to build extensive supply chains, especially into China, right? As a significant global exporter, when China went down in February, there was significant alarm at a global level around being able to provide timely supply, and right. I think it demonstrated quite obviously that how delicate and as he said, they're very fragile. They were not resilient. They were not flexible, and I think when you extrapolate that out to different parts of the response, we saw that in many places our healthcare system was not resilient. It was not adaptable.
Definitely.
We saw a lot of companies when they went into lockdown, a lot of companies and their workforces found it really a challenge to work from home, while other companies, it was relatively easy. So what I think we're seeing is that the COVID situation, especially, it really just kind of threw the curtain back on the need for companies to focus on and accelerate their digital transformations. I can't underscore enough the importance of the use of technology, and that was, on the one hand, supply chain technology. I mean, the ability for companies to be adaptable and resilient in that situation was almost entirely dependent on the ability to go into your digital supply chain platform and find other suppliers.
Yeah.
If you weren't on a digital supply chain platform that was adaptable and resilient, you were going to find it slow and rather difficult to do that. Right. Whereas the ones who were digitized and digitalized found it a lot easier. The same with healthcare and data collection and data transmission. Healthcare providers who were able to quickly implement established protocols, effectively share data, and collect data and integrate it and use it and apply it, saw much better outcomes. And so I think that's the, that's the thing. And we're saying with track and trace, it's the same thing. I mean, you have some very large societies who have not implemented still 6, 7, 8 months on effective track and trace technologies. It is, it's an obvious failure in some case. You can say it's fair to say it was a failure.
Yeah.
Whereas, in places like we're headquartered in Germany, and we saw the German government for the first couple of months try, fail, and then finally just realize, for different reasons, privacy and effective data collection, that they needed a distributed, more resilient, flexible, that was not exactly optimal, not optimized, but it worked. And it may have cost more, it may be a little bit more complex, but it worked. It satisfied all of the different stakeholder needs. And so we partnered with Deutsche Telekom to implement a German track and trace system using Bluetooth and mobile. And that seems to be, one of the prime examples in the world of an effective national track and trace system. So I think it's just another example of investing in effective, and back to what Donald said, digital systems, supply chain systems, healthcare systems that may not on the face of it seem efficient, but they are resilient. And that may mean duplication. It may mean a little bit more inefficiency, but it's more resilient.
Right. I see Donald nodding rigorously. So maybe, Donald, you can share with us, like from a public policy perspective, what are the takeaways from the last few months? What is now easier, harder to achieve?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has revealed some very uncomfortable and even counterintuitive truths. Right? We used to think that the thing that determines whether a government or society is high performing is the capacity of the state. State capacity. America has a great deal of state capacity, technological, resources, scientific, and yet we've seen how the American government has really bungled its response to this pandemic, and so have many other advanced countries. On the other hand, you've seen less developing societies, which on the surface of it has got much less state capacity, being able to prioritize. Vietnam is a very good example. I think China has been too, being able to prioritize its response to the pandemic, and has done a much better job in terms of containing it, in terms of developing those technologies, those applications that Michael spoke about, tracking and tracing. So I think this pandemic has really challenged a lot of our existing assumptions about the relation between state capacity and performance. And I think the big driver here is, what do you prioritize? Do you care about governing? And I think the governments that cared about governing did a much better job. The other thing I would like to highlight is the lens of inequality, besides that of resilience. I think one of the sad tragedies that this pandemic has revealed is that the people who are least responsible for contributing to it, as well as the people who are least responsible for contributing to climate change, are also going to be the ones who are going to pay the highest price. So there's a deep environmental aspect to inequality. It's not just about inequalities of wealth and income. It's also about environmental, spatial, health inequality. And I think it is very appropriate that in the year of the pandemic, the film that won Oscar, the Oscar for Best Picture was Parasite, because that was the theme of Parasite, inequality. At the risk of being a spoiler to those who have not watched Parasite, those of us who have watched it would recall that the poor Kim family, whose carbon footprint, whose environmental footprint was very little. They take public transport, they walk everywhere, they eat leftover food. It was this family that paid a very high price when there was an environmental catastrophe. And similarly, with this pandemic, the people who are less able to adjust and adapt to it, in terms of working from home, people who are on the front line who have to still brave the risks of contracting the illness, have to go to work. They are the least, they are the ones who are the least well paid. They're the ones who are the victims of a highly unequal power system, power structure. So I think, post-pandemic, one of the great opportunities we have is A, to address climate change, because climate change is going to create a lot more of such epidemics and pandemics, and B, also think seriously about how our growth models in the past 30 years have created a highly unequal system that doesn't distribute risks fairly, and the people who contribute least to the risks, environmental or economic risks we face, are the ones least able to cope with those risks.
Right. Thank you. Natalie, what have you seen positive effects that COVID has had on sustainability issues?
To follow on what Donald just mentioned, this grave issue about inequality, climate change, and all this, I think I would just offer a dose of positivity about it is possible. That I believe that it is possible, no matter how humongous the issue may seem. Because I think looking back home here in Hong Kong, for me, in the pandemic, like if I have to find my lens of positivity to it, is the amazing solidarity of the people, that everyone contribute, everyone wear a mask, and because everyone participate, everyone contribute, everyone wear a mask to protect themselves and protect the people around them. So I would say we did fairly okay, like in managing the pandemic outbreak. And once when we relax, go out partying with friends, and then we could see that actually the cases like rise again. And then once when we were being reminded that we need to watch out, and then when we start wearing masks, we start to be more cautious. Then the cases now going down to single digit again. So I think sometimes, like not sometimes, actually every day in sustainability, when we look at these issues about water scarcity, climate change, inequality, hunger, and whatever that you could name it, these issues are so big and so intimidating that we sometimes wonder, is it possible? Or should we just party till midnight and forget all about it? But I think being a sustainability professional, that sense of possibility, that faith that it is still possible, that is something that I think can help us to drive the change. Looking at what Tommaso was saying about what the shift that his company is trying to do, I thought that may start probably, I don't know how many internal discussion or how many years of internal discussion you have been through. It is absolutely not an easy task, but that courage about and believing that you will be able to find and transform your company and start that journey that start from a single step, that's amazing. And I think no matter how heavy the pandemic, how scary the pandemic may be, let's not remember that everyone can contribute and it is possible. We will be able to get through this together.
Okay, Tommaso, I mean, like, has it affected, has the pandemic affected your plans? Because you were mentioning you're putting a lot into R&D and all that. And, with the UN SDG coming up in about 10 years, what is Philip Morris doing to achieve those plans?
Look, of course, the pandemic affected us greatly, like everyone, right? Because it forced you to think about new solutions, to rethink your model. Our considerations in the company went from how do we organize the manufacturing, how do we organize the distribution, how do we then link it to sales? Do we want our employees to go to the office or not? To what extent? How do we protect employees in manufacturing who are traditionally closer in the facility? And so, of course, it's part. I think it strengthened us in our belief that we're going in the right direction, and it strengthened us because the pandemic highlighted the importance of health and health protection. Obviously, that's what's in everyone's mind everywhere, right? So, of course, doing something that improves the health of your consumer that is the way to go. It only strengthened that, but it also strengthened our belief that science is the key. Because, I mean, in Hong Kong, like everywhere, the debate was largely on science. In France, it was really science and policy prevails. It was very interesting to watch it. But ultimately, everyone agrees today that evidence needs to underpin any policy decision. And the third element of learning for us was that dialogue is even more important. Traditionally in history, every innovation has been taken with a bit of suspicion. I mean, being Italian, I always think of Galileo. Galileo was the first one to say that probably the Earth spins on its axis and orbits around the sun, not the other way around. Well, you know what happened to Galileo, right?
Yes.
Because he went against some existing beliefs and thoughts and credos. So dialogue is the key to that. And we're even stronger today in thinking that dialogue is important. And the fourth is information. I think the pandemic really strengthened the importance of information for everyone. Adult smokers, for instance, should have information about new alternatives to cigarettes. Think about the 600,000 smokers in Hong Kong. I mean, they deserve to have access and information about better alternatives. So those are really the four considerations that we made out of COVID, and that really are going to take us to achieving the UN's SDGs ASAP. of course, taking aside on what we're doing to address gender equality, where we, I think, have a lot of progress to do still, although the glass is half full. What we're doing in terms of responsible consumption, particularly to address the issues of youth smoking and vaping, but not only. And finally, environmental sustainability in manufacturing, where, for instance, we want to be carbon neutral by 2030 as a company and 2050 as a value chain. All of this, of course, is based on those core pillars. So health, science, dialogue, and information.
Yeah. So, I mean, Michael, 2030, 10 more years. Some may not make it.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that that we, worldwide, we will not achieve many of the SDGs, and that's for a lot of different reasons. Although there are a lot of countries which have made remarkable progress on some of them. Hello?
Yes, we're here.
Yeah, okay. Have made remarkable progress on some of them, like China and in ending hunger and extreme poverty and so forth. But it's pretty clear that that we're probably not moving fast enough on a lot of them, and time is of the essence. So you say we have 10 years, really. So we're calling this the decade of delivery, right? We have to now really get down and get serious about implementation of these things. And like Tommaso just said, we have a carbon neutral target, 2025, and we're part of the science-based targets initiative with our own emissions. But really, no one country or one company can do this alone. And so, as Natalie said and Donald said, collaboration, dialogue are essential core capacities, core capabilities that we're all going to have to do. And unfortunately, companies and countries aren't necessarily moving in the right direction when it comes to collaboration on that. So we want to be optimistic. And I think as individuals, as Natalie said, we have to not look at the challenge of we have just 10 more years. We have 10 years to do this, right? And we need to probably look at accelerating some of our commitments and doubling down on some of the things that we've committed to do.
Right.
When it comes down to, yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
No, I was just gonna say that when it comes to some of these specific SDGs, I think it's incumbent on countries, obviously, to look at how they're framing up some of their own programs and key initiatives to achieve the SDGs, the ones that they've signed up for. But I think one of the things that we could talk about is the role of governments and sort of intergovernment organizations versus the role of business and commerce. And
yeah, so I'd like to follow that up with Donald then. How do you think countries can and should be collaborating? Because these are such fractious times. I mean, everybody seems to be hating everybody.
Yeah, baiting is the right word. I think it's been extremely unfortunate that when we have a pandemic, it's a kind of a weakest link public good, where our ability to deal with or eliminate the pandemic or end the pandemic depends a great deal on the weakest link. And the weakest link could be poorest countries, it could be governments that don't care enough about containing the pandemic. And it is these types of public goods that we need the highest level of global coordination and collaboration. And it's happened at a time when relations between the two biggest superpowers are extremely tense. There's a great deal of strategic mistrust. And it does not augur well for many of the many of the sustainable development goals that Michael talked about, whether it's climate change mitigation, dealing with environmental and water scarcities and resources. These are all public goods, global public goods that require a great deal of global cooperation, global governance, and global collaboration. That is in short supply. But having said that, I don't think we need to be we shouldn't be too pessimistic, because there are many other SDGs which governments on their own have sufficient incentive to tackle. Reducing poverty is mostly a a country level issue, dealing with local environmental disasters, dealing with local outbreaks of epidemics. These are things that individual governments can do. We also need not be too pessimistic about the fate of globalization, because that's something which it is in countries' own interests, right, to establish economic links, economic ties with others. Maybe after the pandemic, we will develop a more diversified system of globalization. I don't think we will go into de-globalization or reversal of globalization. I do think we will see efforts at regionalization, even at localization. And that is not necessarily a bad thing in the context of creating more diverse supply chains. So I wouldn't be too pessimistic that the golden era of globalization and of global governance has passed. I think we will evolve as human society, as global societies, we will evolve new responses to deal with the challenges of our time.
Right. So I'm being told by Clark there are lots of eager questions for you guys. So I'd just like to say thank you for joining me on the panel, and I'll hand you over to Clark.
Thank you, Winnie.
Thanks, Winnie. So yeah, we got quite a few questions coming in from the audience right now. So apologies if we are not able to get to every single one of them, but we'll try to get as many across as we can. And I'll just ask our panelists to try to keep your answers brief so we can get through as many of these as we can. This first one is from Martha Velasco. For an organization that is willing to start its way into becoming a sustainable business, but doesn't know how to start, what would be, according to you, the first steps to take? Maybe Tommaso, we can start with you on that one.
I didn't hear you. Can you repeat it? Apologies. There was a weird sound.
Sure, no problem. So for an organization that's willing to start its way into becoming a sustainable business, but isn't quite sure how to start, what would be, according to you, the first step to take?
Look, let me then depart from our own business. We're transforming totally our product and our business model to make sure that we're as sustainable as possible to the roots of what we do. So for an organization that's incipient, that's actually coming to life now, probably what I would say, given this learning where we're doing it after we have built a successful business and we're now retrofitting, that start from the inception. Make sure from the inception that whatever you do is by definition sustainable. It will be a big plus for your business because you will be always ahead of the curve and you will address societal concerns while making your company a success. So probably my only advice, given our experience, is just embed that in the core of your business, in everything you do.
Okay, Natalie, how about you?
I would say we can start looking at materiality. So among the 17 SDGs or the various ESG issues, trying to understand what issues, pick a few to start with, to understand how these issues are both important to society and also relevant to the company. Relevant in the sense that the company has an impact on these issues, or these issues will have a direct impact on the company. Then not to be greedy, but start with a few and really try to understand how these issues connect with the business in a sense about opportunities and also risks. And when you grab one or few issues that you can understand how it relates, then you can gradually build on it and then trying to explore other issues. I think prioritization is key.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, I would just add to what Natalie said about materiality. As part of your environmental, social, and governance corporate strategy, understanding what's most relevant to your business and how you then can take tangible steps to become more sustainable, ultimately ends up in a kind of a fiduciary report. And we've seen in Hong Kong that even though that is now becoming mandatory for these integrated ESG reports to be done by listed companies, they're woefully bad. and so I think we need to look at our leaders, look at our board members and senior managers to start looking at the benefits of an effective materiality assessment and ESG report and ongoing tracking.
Thanks, Michael. And Donald?
Yeah, I'll just say on top of what everybody else has said, a willingness to disrupt yourself. I mean, I really like PMI's story about how they were willing to disrupt themselves, even cannibalize themselves in an industry that has remained more or less unchanged for the last 150 years. And it's extremely difficult for us, a long-standing, well-entrenched incumbent like PMI to disrupt itself, to engage in, to diversify out of its single product, to experiment with different ways of delivering a safer tobacco product. But if a company like PMI can do it, I think most other companies should be able to find alternative, diverse sources or diverse business models.
Thanks. So this next question, I like this question a lot because I think it's quite a pervasive mindset and thought process that a lot of people have. This comes from Wayne Sung. Sustainability seems like a new marketing tool today. It's difficult to see to what extent companies are creating measurable impact that entwines with its business model versus highly talked about CSR initiatives that hope to give people the impression that companies are truly working in this direction for the long term. So what would your response be to this, i.e., sustainable and, investing in sustainability for marketing purposes versus its actual practical use? Maybe we can start with Michael on this one.
I go back to what I just said about the integrated reporting. So that is something where senior leadership has to be deeply involved. It's an official document, and it takes cross-functional teams to put that together. And really, it has to be a reflection of the corporate strategy. And once you start to have that level of conversation around these programs, and that they're not CSR, communication, sustainability team programs designed to, create reputation enhancements, that they are intended to improve performance at a core strategic level, then they're going to be much more effective and obviously taken much more seriously with investments or executive attention.
And Tommaso?
It's a very interesting question, especially for us. I would say that business doesn't happen in isolation. Business happens in society, and there's expectations about business. So a company doesn't manage to address those expectations, in my view, in the long term will ultimately fail for a number of reasons. And that's why I think there is a need to find the balance between the various stakeholders of the company, but also to make sure that your sustainability is real. It's not just there's a smoke stream. And I think there's a need to find the sweet spot between your shareholders and your stakeholders for that to happen. You need to make sure that you drive your business forward so that your sustainability is also very concretely impacting your business while it's addressing those concerns of society. And that's the biggest exercise in everything around sustainability. It definitely is for us.
Okay, Donald, let's go to you.
I don't have anything else to add. I'd actually like to engage with more questions, actually, just to hear more of those.
Okay, Natalie, was there anything you wanted to add on that?
I think that is an excellent question. And I would say is actually everyone's responsibility to help shape how authentic companies are doing in engaging with sustainability issues. So I would just say, I would encourage everyone that are participating in the panel, whether you are working in the business as an employee, or whether you are business owners, or whether you are a consumer or B2B customers or so, exercise not your judgment, but your discernment. So there is nothing wrong, actually, when we look at share value creation for companies that want marketing value from their sustainability initiative, right? I actually, as a sustainability professional, I see nothing wrong with it. But for our world to be socially and environmentally more sustainable, we need actions that are wider, that are deeper than those that only bring marketing value to businesses. So in that case, we count on everyone, whether you're a consumer, B2B customer, whatever, that you use your money to vote. you ask questions with businesses. When you go to restaurants, ask restaurant, where does the food come from? Where does the seafood come from? Is it from sustainable sources? When you buy something with a packaging, you ask them, is this recyclable also? Then with everyone participating, like our wearing our mask in pandemic, then little by little, we can nudge the changes and also give the incentive for the businesses to actually take authentic action that are much wider and deeper than the marketing value that they can bring.
Thanks, Natalie. So I'll ask one more question here in the amount of time we have, and I'll combine two questions. They're sort of along the same line. Looking ahead to the future of Hong Kong, in this first question, the social protections highlighted by the speakers, this is from Mark Harper, the social protections highlighted by the speakers have varied geographically and arguably linked to strong labor laws and unionizations. Do the speakers expect to see a push in markets such as Hong Kong for increased labor laws like freedom of association, collective bargaining, and union laws? And then I'm going to combine this with a question from Christy Wells, which is just simply, do you think Hong Kong provides a healthy environment to foster innovation? Maybe we can start with Donald on this one.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I was hinting at without explicitly mentioning Hong Kong, because in the last, God knows how long, Hong Kong has sort of subscribed to this laissez-faire free market ideology. When Milton Friedman, the great prophet of markets, visited Hong Kong, he said, if you want to see how a free market capitalism works, or free market capitalist economy works, come to Hong Kong. And I think while that might have been true in 30, 40 years ago, I think the context has changed and the environment has changed significantly. And whether it's the global financial crisis or this pandemic, what that has shown is we are really likely to see a return of a competent state, or that societies will do better if there is a strong state, a strong competent state to complement a strong functioning capitalist economy. Whether it's in public health protection, whether it is in climate change mitigation, whether it's in terms of reducing inequality. I think we all can see the value and the necessity of competent government, whether it's in the form of regulation, in the form of ameliorating inequality, or in anticipating and preventing future environmental catastrophes. We do need to see the return of a strong state and a competent bureaucracy.
Thanks, Donald. Michael, let's go to you.
Well, I think if you look at the pillars of the Hong Kong economy, you've got a large number of conglomerates who have large influence, and I think, in relation to Donald's insightful answer, in absence of a strong state, I think you're going to have to look to the corporate role and corporate influence in these areas, where you have kind of a somewhat unusual balance of power and influence in the Hong Kong economy. So do I think that workers' rights will be better represented? I think COVID does present that opportunity. And I think in correlation with that, you have, in many instances, kind of a generational change of leadership. And I think this new, younger generation of leaders are probably a lot more, let's say, have a broader view. They've had different exposures, different types of education, and different priority sets. So I think, there's room to be optimistic that workers' rights would be better represented, but I think they also need to, it needs to be done in, vis-a-vis some stronger regulations and policies.
Thank you, Michael. And Natalie.
I want to just build on what Donald shared, is that I think that there is room and there is possibility for us here in Hong Kong to really explore a shift and a transformation from the shareholder primacy into a more stakeholder capitalism, where you, in the pursuit of economic prosperity, that we also take into considerations and a balance of other stakeholders. And I don't think this is a fantasy. Again, I will offer that dose of positivity is that in the, especially the newer generation of family-owned business owners that we work with, we do see that mindset, because we do see that mindset of playing an infinite game. And when you play an infinite game for your business, naturally, no matter how you do your MPV, like your personal interest should align with common good, because you do need a market for you to operate. You do need people to help you run the business. So there is no game for you if you drive them to extinction.
And Tommaso, you'll be the final panelist to speak on this one.
Yes, and it's really hard to be the fourth one because all the important items have been covered by the previous ones. But on these questions, I can only say, look, traditionally, Hong Kong has been a hub of international trading, largely of innovation, with a strategic position, great talent pool, and a business-friendly environment. In our case, as I mentioned, we actually extended our investment with 10 million investment in 2018 to create what we call an e-hub, a hub that's an in-between the product design and the product industrialization, which lies in China, exactly for those reasons. And we have 100 people now working in Hong Kong. So look, we look at it through the lens of innovation. Hong Kong traditionally has been a place that favors innovation, that understands innovation, yes, perhaps after scrutiny and intelligent questions. So we're confident it will continue to be that way.
All right, thanks, Tommaso. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for this webinar. Thank you so much to our panelists, Natalie, Donald, Tommaso, and Michael, for sharing their time and expertise to the discussion. And of course, thanks to Winnie for her excellent moderating. Before we go, I want to inform our audience that we'll be holding our Asia Sustainability Conference on November 4th. For more information on this, you can visit our event website at sustainabilityconference.asia, or you can scan the QR code that you see on your screen right now. Thank you to everyone who logged in to watch this webinar. We really hope you enjoyed the discussion, and we look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.